There comes a moment when you realize that the only way to protect your peace is by choosing distance. It's not about anger or resentment, nor is it about proving a point. It's about self-respect. Choosing yourself in a world that has for too long conditioned you to believe that your worth is tied to how much you tolerate, how much you give, and how much you endure for the sake of others. But setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of clarity. And yet, when you start enforcing those boundaries, some people will resist. They will be frustrated, confused, or even angry because to them, your compliance was never questioned. They thrived in your overextension. So when you decide to take a step back, they perceive it as rejection rather than self-care. The truth is, people get used to a version of you that makes their life easier. They get comfortable with the idea that you will always be available, always say yes, and always put their needs before your own. And when you no longer fit that expectation, it disrupts the dynamic they relied on. Suddenly, the person who always picked up the phone, who always made room, who always put their own feelings aside for the sake of keeping the peace, stops. That's when the discomfort sets in, not for you, but for them, because your choice to create space forces them to confront the reality that your presence was never owed to them in the first place. Some people will take it personally, no matter how gently or clearly you communicate your need for distance. They will assume that you're being cold, distant, or ungrateful, rather than recognizing that you are choosing to honor yourself in a way you never did before. They may try to guilt you, reminding you of all the times you were there for them, as if your loyalty should come at the cost of your own well-being. They may even twist the narrative, painting you as selfish because you are no longer self-sacrificing. But what they fail to understand is that boundaries are not punishments. You are not cutting people off out of spite. You are making intentional decisions about where your energy goes and ensuring that you are no longer pouring into spaces that drain you. It is a difficult thing choosing yourself when you've spent so much of your life prioritizing others. At first, you may feel guilt, wondering if you are being unfair, if you are somehow abandoning those who once relied on you. But that guilt is not yours to carry. It is a conditioned response to years of being told that your worth is in your ability to be everything for everyone. But when you strip that away, when you refuse to be available at the expense of your own emotional well-being, you begin to see who truly values you, not just for what you can do for them, but for who you are. The reality is, people who respect you will understand your boundaries. They won't question your need for space, nor will they make you feel guilty for taking care of yourself. The ones who truly care will meet you where you are, without demands, without expectations, and without resentment. They will understand that choosing distance doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care about yourself too. And so as you navigate the discomfort of this change, as you deal with the reactions of those who do not understand, remember this: you are not responsible for how others feel about your boundaries. You are only responsible for ensuring that you no longer betray yourself in an effort to keep others comfortable. The people who matter will adjust. The ones who don't were never truly in your corner to begin with. When you choose to step back, to disengage from relationships and dynamics that no longer serve you, something remarkable happens. You start to see things with clarity. Distance has a way of exposing truths that were previously blurred by attachment, obligation, or the simple habit of always being present. And in that space, you begin to recognize who was truly there for you and who was only there for what you provided. At first, the shift feels subtle. You may stop initiating conversations as often, giving less of yourself to those who have come to expect your constant emotional availability. And as you do, you start noticing patterns. Some people, the ones who genuinely care about you, will check in, sensing the shift, but not demanding explanations. They will respect your space and still make an effort to be there, even if they don't understand your reasons fully. Others, however, will simply disappear. They will not ask why you've been distant, nor will they reach out unless they need something from you. And that is the moment of revelation. The moment you realize that some connections were never built on mutual respect or care, but rather on convenience. It's a sobering realization. The people you once poured so much into, the ones you constantly showed up for, may not have been as invested in you as you were in them. They may not have been as attentive to your needs as you were to theirs. And while this truth may sting at first, it is ultimately liberating. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Once you recognize who values you for who you are rather than what you provide, you can no longer make excuses for relationships that drain you. The difficult part is accepting that not everyone will make the effort to stay when you stop overextending yourself. Some people thrive on relationships that are one-sided, whether intentionally or not. They are comfortable receiving, comfortable taking, and comfortable leaning on you until you stop making yourself so accessible. Then, instead of matching your energy or asking what you need, they may choose to walk away entirely. But that is not a loss, that is clarity. That is proof that your worth was measured by your willingness to sacrifice yourself, rather than by who you are at your core. And yet, the most telling reaction will come from those who feel entitled to your time, your emotional labor, and your presence. They may not leave quietly. Instead, they may try to guilt you, question why you've changed, or accuse you of being distant and ungrateful. They may remind you of all the things you used to do for them, as if those past actions were an unspoken contract that required you to continue indefinitely. But what they fail to understand is that relationships at their healthiest are built on mutual care, not obligation. Your past generosity does not mean you owe them your continued sacrifice. So when distance begins to reveal the true nature of your relationships, pay attention. Pay attention to who reaches out, not because they need something, but because they genuinely care. Pay attention to who respects your space without making you feel guilty for needing it. Pay attention to who remains when there is no benefit to them other than simply having you in their life. These are the people worth keeping. The others, let them go, not out of bitterness or resentment, but out of love for yourself. You deserve relationships where you are valued, not just for what you give, but for who you are. And sometimes the only way to see that clearly is by choosing distance. When you decide to create space between yourself and certain people, one of the first things you notice is how uncomfortable it makes them. Not necessarily because they miss you, but because they can no longer rely on your presence to meet their needs. It's not about love or care for them. It's about the disruption of their expectations. You were predictable, always there, always responding, always making the effort. And now that you've withdrawn, there's a shift, an imbalance that unsettles them. They don't know how to function without your constant availability, and that frustration manifests as anger, confusion, or even resentment. The thing is, when someone has benefited from your emotional labor for so long, they don't see it as something you voluntarily gave. They see it as something they were entitled to. And entitlement breeds a dangerous mindset. It makes people believe they have a right to your time, your energy, your attention without reciprocating that same effort. So when you finally take a step back and refuse to overextend yourself, it feels like an attack to them. In their eyes, you aren't just pulling away, you are depriving them of something they believe they deserve. This is where the real test begins, because once they realize they can no longer control how much of yourself you give, they will try to regain that control. They may attempt to provoke you, to stir emotions in you that make you second guess your decision. Maybe they will accuse you of being distant, of acting brand new, or of thinking you're better than them. Maybe they will remind you of everything you've shared, as if history alone should be enough to keep you tethered. Or maybe they will outright lash out, trying to make you feel guilty for choosing yourself. But beneath all of that, the words, the passive aggression, the sudden concern, is one simple truth. They are upset because they can no longer manipulate the version of you that always gave in. And that's the moment you have to remind yourself why you chose distance in the first place. It wasn't to punish anyone. It wasn't to prove a point. It was because you finally realized that pouring all your energy into people who don't pour back is a recipe for exhaustion. It was because you recognized that being available to everyone all the time left you with nothing for yourself. It was because you understood that if a relationship can't survive you prioritizing your own well-being, then it was never truly a healthy relationship to begin with. But let's be honest, standing firm in your decision isn't easy. There will be moments of doubt, moments where you wonder if you're overreacting, if you're being too harsh, if maybe, just maybe, you should reach out and smooth things over. That's the old conditioning talking. The part of you that was taught to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, to sacrifice your own comfort, to maintain relationship. But the truth is, any connection that requires you to diminish yourself to keep it alive is not a connection worth keeping. Instead of caving to the pressure, pay attention to how people react to your boundaries. The ones who genuinely care about you will respect your need for space, even if they don't understand it. They won't guilt trip you, they won't demand explanations, and they won't make your decision about them. But the ones who were only there for what you provided, they will show their true colors. They will reveal through their frustration and anger that your worth to them was transactional. And that is all the confirmation you need that you made the right choice. Because at the end of the day, your peace is not up for negotiation. Your well-being is not something to be bargained with. You have the right to choose yourself, to step away from dynamics that drain you, to redefine what you are willing to accept. And if that makes some people mad, let them be mad. Their reaction is not your responsibility. When you choose to step back to create distance from relationships that no longer serve you, there will always be those who struggle to accept it, not because they value your presence in a meaningful way, but because they feel entitled to it. The moment you start prioritizing yourself, setting boundaries, and refusing to engage in the same cycles, their perception of you shifts. You are no longer the person they could always rely on to be there, to listen, to fix, to absorb their negativity without question. And that change unsettles them. What people don't often realize is that distance is not an act of hostility. It's an act of self-preservation. You do not owe anyone unlimited access to you, especially when that access comes at the cost of your well-being. But those who once benefited from your lack of boundaries will take it personally. They will see your detachment as an attack, even if it has nothing to do with them. They will read into your silence, assume the worst, and project their insecurities onto you. Some will try to re-engage with you in subtle ways, sending messages disguised as check-ins, but with an undertone of guilt. You've changed. You don't care anymore. I guess you're too busy for me now. These words are not genuine expressions of concern. They are attempts to pull you back in. They want you to feel bad for choosing yourself. They want to trigger the old you, the one who would immediately overcompensate, reassure, and shrink yourself to keep the peace. But you are no longer that person, and that realization frustrates them. Others will take a more aggressive approach. They may lash out, accusing you of being selfish, ungrateful, or even heartless. They will remind you of everything you've shared, every moment of connection, as if history alone is a reason to stay in a dynamic that is no longer healthy for you. What they fail to recognize is that true relationships, real, deep, and meaningful ones, are built on mutual respect, not obligation. If your presence in someone's life is only appreciated when you are giving endlessly, then that is not a relationship worth maintaining. The truth is, when you choose yourself, you force others to confront their own insecurities. Your growth reminds them of their stagnation. Your peace highlights their internal chaos. Your ability to detach from toxic cycles makes them realize they are still stuck in them. And instead of reflecting on their own behaviors, they project their discomfort onto you. They make you the villain in their story, because it's easier than accepting that maybe, just maybe, they were taking advantage of your kindness. But here's the thing, their reaction is not your responsibility. You are not obligated to explain yourself. You do not have to justify your choices to those who were never willing to see the burden you carried in the first place. You do not need to apologize for prioritizing your well-being. What you need to do is stay firm. Keep your distance, protect your peace, because the ones who truly matter, the ones who genuinely care, will not make you feel guilty for growing. They will not punish you for needing space. They will respect your journey, even if they don't fully understand it. And the rest, let them be mad. Let them let them create whatever narrative they need to soothe their own discomfort. That is their burden to carry, not yours.